They gave me 5 minutes to hand over my sidearm, ID card, and rank insignia. 5 minutes. My sister, Colonel Vanessa Kincaid, stood at the front of the briefing room like a judge waiting for an execution to be carried out. I'd seen her pull that same expression when chewing out junior officers cold, efficient, rehearsed, but this time, the target was me. The air inside Fort Liberty's command briefing room felt heavy, like no one wanted to breathe too loudly. The long table was lined with field-grade officers, laptops open, screens glowing with the morning agenda. Most of them avoided eye contact. A few stared at the PowerPoint slide, still frozen behind me, the one I'd made for my operational readiness review. I'd spent a week preparing it. Irony really is the Army's favorite punchline. Vanessa didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice had that kind of precision that could slice through metal. Captain Holt, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. You will surrender your sidearm and credentials. The words landed like small-caliber rounds, quiet but deadly. Nobody said a thing. I looked around. My team, my soldiers, sat in the second row. Staff Sergeant Briggs, Specialist Rivera, Lieutenant Daniels, all of them looked stunned. I wanted to tell them it was fine, that I'd be fine, but my voice wouldn't move past the lump in my throat. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Understood, ma'am." If she wanted a reaction, she didn't get one. I unclipped my rank insignia and set it on the table next to the clicker I'd been using to run my slides. The irony hit me. I'd just finished explaining how our cyber defense unit had increased readiness by 40% under my command. Vanessa waited, chin slightly raised, as if daring me to break protocol. When I handed over my sidearm, the two MPs stepped forward. They weren't aggressive, just awkward. We'd shared coffee in the same break room 2 hours ago. Now they were witnesses to my career being stripped away in front of 12 officers and a sister who looked proud of herself. Vanessa glanced at her watch and said, "You have 4 minutes remaining." That's when I smiled. Not out of grace, out of disbelief. The kind of laugh you give when the absurdity of life reaches Olympic levels. I started packing the few things on the desk, my briefing notes, a small notebook full of system diagrams, a flash drive I'd labeled OpsRef A1. Every movement was deliberate. No one spoke. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound. I could feel the weight of their silence, every officer wondering what line I'd crossed to deserve this. The truth was, I hadn't. The only thing I was guilty of was being better at the job than Vanessa. When I looked up, my sister's face was unreadable, but her eyes had that gleam I'd seen before, the same one from childhood whenever she won. She'd beaten me at chess, at ROTC rankings, at getting Dad's approval. This time, she wasn't playing for bragging rights. She wanted me gone. Outside the glass wall of the briefing room, movement caught my eye. Sergeant Briggs stood up from his workstation, then Rivera, then Lieutenant Daniels. At first, I thought they were just repositioning, but one by one, they gathered their gear and headed toward the door. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "What the hell are they doing?" Within seconds, 22 soldiers were standing by the exit, not shouting, not saluting, just waiting for me. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "This is not a protest. Everyone will return to their stations immediately." No one moved. I lifted the cardboard box I'd found near the supply cabinet and tucked my files inside. My hand brushed against the chipped coffee mug my team had given me last Christmas, "World's Oakiest Captain." They'd ordered it as a joke, but it meant more to me than any plaque the Army ever gave out. I placed it gently on top. Vanessa tapped the table with her pen. "Captain, your time is up." I straightened, looked her right in the eye and said, "Then I guess we're done here." The door opened, and the hallway outside was full of faces: junior enlisted, tech specialists, admin clerks. Some had no idea what was happening. Others did. You could see it in the way they stepped aside, like watching a funeral procession. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I walked out. Behind me, 22 soldiers followed. Their boots echoed down the polished floor, steady and synchronized. It didn't feel like defiance. It felt like closure. When we reached the security checkpoint, the MP on duty, Tom, looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. He'd seen everything from drunken fights to disciplinary arrests, but never this. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "Don't be," I replied. "You're just doing your job." He nodded, then looked at the group behind me. All of you? Briggs answered for them. All of us. Tom exhaled slowly and opened the gate. I've never seen anything like this, he muttered. Neither had I. When we stepped outside, the sunlight was too bright, like the world had the audacity to keep going while mine was being dismantled. Someone from maintenance stopped mid-sweep to watch. 2 officers by the motor pool stared like they couldn't process what they were seeing. 23 of us stood there in silence, me, 22 soldiers, and 1 guard who probably regretted showing up for work that morning. Briggs adjusted his cap and said, "Ma'am, where to?" I had no plan. No next step. Just 5 minutes ago, I'd been a company commander responsible for a multi-million-dollar cyber defense system. Now, I was unemployed in uniform. "Go home," I said finally. "That's an order." They hesitated, looking at one another. Rivera was the first to speak. "With respect, ma'am, that's not happening." I almost laughed again, but it came out more like a sigh. We stood in the parking lot long enough for someone to start a slow clap from the motor pool fence line. It wasn't sarcastic, it was quiet, respectful, the kind of thing that starts with one person and spreads until you realize the whole damn base is watching. A voice behind me whispered, "They'll never recover from this." I didn't turn to see who said it. I already knew they were right. Vanessa might have stripped my rank, but she'd just stripped herself of command without realizing it. The sound of boots faded as everyone dispersed, and I found myself alone beside my car, staring at my own reflection in the driver's window. For a second, I saw the woman who'd spent 12 years building her career brick by brick deployments, late nights, commendations no one remembered. Then I blinked, and she was gone. I placed the box on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove through the front gate of Fort Liberty for what I assumed was the last time. The guard at the gate saluted out of habit. I saluted back out of reflex. Neither of us said a word. Half a mile down the road, my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Not yet. The road stretched ahead flat, empty, and painfully familiar. Same route I'd taken every morning for 6 years. But that morning, it felt different. Like I'd left something behind I couldn't get back. Or maybe, for the first time, I'd actually taken something with me that mattered. The coffee on my counter had gone cold before I even realized I hadn't taken a sip. My uniform jacket was still folded on the chair by the door, and that damn cardboard box sat on the kitchen table, like a reminder that everything could vanish faster than a promotion rumor. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the counter, but the sound of the spoon clinking against the mug brought me back to that briefing room. My hands were steady now, which was worse. It meant the shock had worn off, and what came next was going to hurt in slow motion. I didn't cry. I've never been the crying type. But the silence in my apartment felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried in a rucksack. I grabbed my keys just to escape it. The next thing I knew, I was halfway to my parents' house without even thinking about it. They lived 30 minutes outside Bay's small town. Quiet. One of those neighborhoods where flags hang year-round, not just on holidays. Mom opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been standing there waiting. "Amber," she said softly. Vanessa called. Of course she did. My sister never missed a chance to get ahead of the story. I stepped inside, and the smell of roast beef hit me Sunday dinner, just like always. Dad sat at the table, newspaper folded neatly beside his plate, pretending to read the sports section even though I knew he'd heard every word. "I'm fine," I said before either of them could ask. Mom's eyes flicked down to the civilian clothes I was wearing. She didn't mention the missing rank patches or the absence of my name tape. She didn't have to. "We're proud of both our girls," Dad said without looking up. That was his version of neutral ground. He'd used the same tone when he was a first sergeant breaking up fights in the barracks firm, controlled, detached. Vanessa's photo hung on the wall above the mantel, framed in polished oak. Full dress uniform, silver star, perfect smile. Next to it was mine, same uniform, different expression. Mine looked like I was trying to prove something. Hers looked like she already had. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as family time. Mom filled plates like she was performing peacekeeping operations. Nobody said discharge or investigation. The words hung in the air anyway. Dad finally broke the silence halfway through his meal. "Your sister said there was an issue with your command. Something about procedure." "There wasn't," I said. He chewed slowly, eyes on his plate. You know, sometimes leadership means accepting when someone else has to take over. I laughed, short, sharp, ugly. Yeah. I got that memo loud and clear. Mom reached across the table, her diamond bracelet clinking softly. Sweetheart, your sister's under pressure too. It's not easy being in command. I leaned back, arms crossed. No, it's not easy. Especially when the people under you know more than you do. The fork slipped from Dad's hand and hit the plate with a metallic clink. Watch your tone. There it was, the old reflex. I'd heard it my entire life. Vanessa could throw tantrums, and it was leadership potential. I raised my voice once, and it was attitude. Ed Crest. Mom tried to smile, the kind that begged everyone to stop talking before the truth showed up. Amber, you've always been so independent. Maybe this is a chance to reset. Reset? I repeated. You think getting humiliated in front of half the command is a reset? Her lips pressed together. Your sister said you'd been under a lot of stress. I stood up before I said something that would stick forever. You know what? I think I've lost my appetite. And the chair legs scraped against the hardwood. Dad didn't move, didn't speak. I think part of him wanted to, but the other part, the army part, believed silence was discipline. I stopped at the door. For the record, I didn't screw up. I did my job, and I did it better than she ever could. Mom whispered, Amber, please don't turn this into competition. I looked back at her. It already is. The drive back to my place was quiet, except for the hum of the tires on asphalt. The radio stayed off. Every red light felt longer than usual. My mind kept replaying Vanessa's voice. You are hereby relieved of duty, like it had been tattooed on my skull. When I got home, I pulled up the newsfeed for Fort Liberty's internal network. No statement, no memo, nothing. That meant the brass were sitting on it, waiting to see how bad it looked. Military PR, sent un, delay equals denial. Then a new post popped up on the unit's message board. Change of command ceremony. 0800 Monday. Anders, no mention of me. No thanks for service. Just a clean replacement, like I'd never existed. I closed the laptop and stared at the blank wall. The thing about the Army, they're masters at making people disappear without firing a shot. A knock on the door made me flinch. I opened it to find Staff Sergeant Briggs standing there, out of uniform, holding a brown envelope. Ma'am, he said, I know I shouldn't be here, but you need to see this. He handed me the envelope and stepped inside. I didn't invite him, but I didn't stop him either. Inside were printouts, emails, time logs, system access reports. What am I looking at? I asked. Proof, he said. Wells pulled admin data from your secure drive 2 days before the briefing. Vanessa authorized it. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? Signed with her CAC card, he said. I made copies before the network wiped the log. They'll try to cover it up. I sat down hard on the couch. The papers spread across my lap. The access timestamps matched the hours I'd been off duty. Whoever orchestrated it had planned it perfectly. Briggs stood at attention, even though we were standing in my living room. Ma'am, you need to take this to legal. What they did isn't just dirty, it's unlawful command influence. I exhaled slowly. If I report it, I'll never get back in uniform. He hesitated. With respect, ma'am, they already made sure you're out. The silence between us said everything. He left the papers on the coffee table and nodded once. We've got your back, whatever you decide. Then he was gone. I looked at the clock, 2,300 hours. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Against better judgment, I answered. Captain Holt? A woman's voice said. Who's asking? This is Holly Whitman, civilian attorney. Sergeant Briggs sent me your info. I specialize in military administrative law. I rubbed my temple. That was fast. He didn't want to waste time, she said. From what I've heard, your sister broke multiple procedures. You may have grounds for an Inspector General complaint. I laughed quietly. You have any idea how many people actually win those? Yes, she said. The ones who document everything. The line went silent for a moment, just the faint sound of her typing. Then she added, You've been set up, Captain. But the difference between a setup and a takedown is how you respond. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. And what do you suggest? Her tone shifted calm, precise, like she'd rehearsed this speech 100 times. You don't react. You build your case. Quietly, methodically, and when the time comes, you let the truth destroy them. Something in her voice made me believe her. Maybe it was the certainty. Or maybe I was just tired of being the quiet one in a family where silence had always meant surrender. All right, I said. Where do we start? Tomorrow morning, she replied. But tonight, get some sleep. You'll need it. I hung up, staring at the papers Briggs had left. My sister might have taken my rank, but she'd also just handed me something stronger than authority evidence. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel defeated. I felt focused. The kind of focused that comes right before a counterattack. The next morning, my alarm went off at 0600 like nothing had changed. Old habits don't die. They just show up uninvited. I brewed coffee, sat down with a legal pad, and wrote out every detail from the past month: the weird access logs, the unannounced inspection, the shift in Vanessa's tone during meetings. I treated it like a mission brief, except this time, the enemy wore my last name. Holly called right on time. Her voice sounded too awake for someone who'd probably been up reading regulations all night. I went through what your sergeant sent. It's solid. What we need now is sequence, cause, and effect. So, you want a timeline, I said, flipping a page. Exactly. Command-level manipulations always hide behind paperwork. We prove intent by pattern. I wasn't new to systems. My career was built on finding the pattern no one else saw. That's what made this sting so much. Vanessa had used my own methods against me. The first anomaly had been 2 weeks before the briefing. Lieutenant Connor Wells, her golden boy, had suddenly asked for administrative clearance to update network protocols. I'd approved limited access. He was supposed to be observing, not executing. But within days, backup cycles slowed, firewall rules changed, and my audit logs were missing chunks of data. When I questioned him, he smiled like a man who'd already rehearsed his lie. Just a sync issue, ma'am. You know how the system likes to eat its own tail. I'd seen that grin before in every officer who thought charm outranked competence. Now, sitting at my dining table, I wrote his name 3 times, then circled it. Wells wasn't clever enough to orchestrate this. He was following orders. By 0900, Holly and I were on a call with her paralegal, who'd pulled Vanessa's command directives from the base intranet. Everything looked squeaky clean. Too clean. Not a single memo hinted at disciplinary issues. It was like my entire command record had been polished for public display. Typical, Holly muttered. They always rewrite history before the ink dries on the reprimand. I can get the raw copies, I said. There's a mirror server in the comms annex that logs everything before edits. Can you access it without alerting them? I designed the access protocol, I said flatly. That afternoon, I drove to Fort Liberty under the pretense of returning equipment. The MPs at the gate waved me through. They hadn't gotten the memo yet, apparently. The base looked the same as always, but something in the air felt off. Conversations stopped when I walked by. A few people nodded. Others pretended not to see me. The military's version of social distancing. Inside the comms annex, the familiar hum of servers greeted me like an old friend. I signed in with my CAC card still active, surprisingly, and navigated to the system logs. The terminal flickered as lines of text scrolled past. Access granted. User C. Kincaid. V. Action. File copy. Ops archive diviso per Holt command. I froze. That was Vanessa's credential signature. She'd accessed my archive 5 times in 1 week. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the period right before the briefing. I downloaded the logs onto a flash drive and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Before leaving, I noticed something else, a new folder labeled Transition Review. Inside, I found a memo draft. Captain Holt demonstrated repeated difficulty managing personnel stress and responding to operational pressure. Command recommends relief to preserve mission efficiency. The signature block at the bottom was already filled in with Vanessa's name. The draft date was 2 weeks before the briefing. So, the decision had been made before I even walked into that room. The hallway outside was empty. I could hear my own footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. For the first time in 12 years, the base didn't feel like home. It felt like surveillance. When I got back to my car, I called Holly. I have proof she planned my removal in advance. Drafts, logs, her signature. Good, she said. We'll file for data preservation before they try to erase anything. What about Wells? She hesitated. We'll get to him, but first, we make sure your evidence doesn't disappear. The phrase stuck with me. Make sure your evidence doesn't disappear. In the Army, evidence tends to vanish faster than coffee in the duty office. That night, I met Briggs and a few of my former soldiers at a diner off post. The kind of place where the coffee is terrible, the eggs are overcooked, and the booths are full of secrets. Rivera slid a napkin across the table. We've been keeping track of who's getting reassigned. Half the units already filed transfers. Briggs added, morale's tanked. Everyone knows what she did. Nobody's saying it out loud, but they all saw it. I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. They'll survive. The Army always does. Rivera frowned. You don't get it, ma'am. It's not just about you. She's destroying everything you built. I looked up at him. Then we don't let her. When I got home, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The files loaded, and I scrolled through lines of metadata user IDs, command timestamps, deletion requests. I knew these patterns better than my own handwriting. That's when I saw it. A message buried in the log comments section. Connor, make sure the backup looks clean before Friday. Use the override string if she checks. Signed, V. Kincaid. She'd ordered him to scrub the logs. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Betrayal was one thing. Incompetence was another. She'd left a trace. Rookie mistake. My phone buzzed again, Briggs. Ma'am, Wells is packing up his office. Word is he's getting promoted to acting operations officer. Already? Yes, ma'am. Vanessa's fast-tracking him. Guess loyalty has perks. I almost laughed. Yeah, it usually does until it backfires. He paused. What's the move? Nothing, I said. Not yet. Because the truth was, I didn't need to fight her right now. She was already laying out the rope. I just had to make sure she kept pulling. I spent the next few hours organizing the data into a clean report. Every timestamp, every file hash, every unauthorized command. I labeled the document Chronology of Command Breach. It wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror showing her exactly what she'd become. At 0200, I saved everything to encrypted cloud storage and shut the laptop. The room felt still, quiet, deliberate. Somewhere on base, Vanessa was probably asleep, confident she'd buried me for good. But the funny thing about systems, when you know where the cracks are, you don't need to blow them up. You just wait for pressure to do the rest. I leaned back on the couch, still in uniform pants, half-empty mug beside me, the faint glow of the screen casting blue light across the room. The laptop fan whirred, steady and rhythmic. It reminded me of the server room's cold, predictable, full of noise that masked the danger building underneath. The kind of noise that always came right before everything failed at once. The smell of burned coffee and disinfectant always meant briefing day. Even after being stripped of rank, my body still woke at 0500 out of habit. The irony? Vanessa had scheduled another command briefing for that morning, the same room, same agenda, just without me in it. She was nothing if not predictable. By 0700, I was sitting in the parking lot of a diner, across from the base, laptop open, watching the security feed that Briggs had quietly patched me into weeks earlier. The man had friends in the right places, and apparently, those friends still hated Vanessa's brand of leadership. Inside the conference room, everyone looked tense, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the giant screen where Vanessa stood in front of my old slides. She'd kept my presentation template. She even used my color scheme. If imitation were valor, she'd have a medal by now. I watched her gesture toward a chart labeled Operational Response Metrics, the same chart I'd built from scratch. Only now, the heading read, Under New Command. A few of my former officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rivera sat near the back, pretending to take notes but glancing at his watch every 30 seconds. Vanessa spoke confidently, like she owned the room, but her eyes moved too fast, checking reactions, scanning faces. The mark of a leader who ruled by fear, not respect. Then the door opened, and Lieutenant Connor Wells walked in late. Of course he did. He gave her that half-smile she mistook for loyalty and handed her a folder. She opened it, scanned the contents, and froze just long enough for the camera to catch it. Whatever was in that folder, she didn't like it. I zoomed in on the feed. The paper bore a red header, Command Cyber Integrity Report, Preliminary Findings. The report was from division headquarters. It detailed the 14-hour system outage that had paralyzed 3 installations last week, the same outage caused by Vanessa's decision to override backup protocols I'd designed. She tried to keep her expression steady, but her hand tightened around the folder. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple. The camera didn't lie. Briggs' voice came through my headset. "Ma'am, you seeing this?" "Every frame," I said. "She's gonna throw Wells under the bus any minute now." "She'll try," I replied. "But he's already tied to her." The room erupted in murmurs as one of the analysts, Major Franks, stood up. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Vanessa hesitated. "Go ahead." "With all due respect, this report shows the outage was caused by unauthorized protocol changes. If the person who approved those changes is in this room, they need to answer for it." End of 4. Connor shifted in his seat, his face draining of color. Vanessa straightened her posture and said, "That's an ongoing matter. The fault was systemic, not individual." Franks didn't sit down. "Ma'am, the report lists a single authorization ID, yours." The room went dead silent. I didn't need sound to feel the tension. Even the projector light seemed to dim. Vanessa's jaw tightened. She started speaking, her lips forming the words I'd heard too many times. Miscommunication, delegated authority, context. The classic vocabulary of people who've run out of truth. Briggs chuckled softly through the line. "Well, this just got interesting." "It's not over yet," I said. She's still got rank. But the cracks were showing. She closed the folder, forced a smile, and said, "We'll address this through the proper channels. For now, let's stay focused on operations." I do. Except no one was listening anymore. The meeting limped along for another 15 minutes before she called it. Half the officers left before she even dismissed them. One by one, they walked out, and I could tell from their faces that something inside the chain of command had broken for good. Vanessa stood there, alone at the front of the room, staring at my old slide deck still glowing behind her, the one she'd tried to claim as her own. When she finally left, she slammed the folder under her arm so hard the paper bent. The feed cut off a few seconds later. I closed the laptop and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. It wasn't satisfaction. Not yet. What I felt was confirmation that she'd done this to herself faster than I ever could have. I drove back toward the base perimeter and parked near the fence line, watching convoys roll through the morning fog. The sound of engines mixed with cadence calls from distant PT formations. 12 years of my life existed behind that gate. 12 years of deployments, missed holidays, and field exercises in the rain, all wiped clean with one public order. My phone buzzed again. "Holly, please tell me you're not watching the live feed," she said. "I am," I replied. "Then you already know Division Command has opened an internal review." My pulse kicked up. On her. On the entire operation. But make no mistake, they're coming for her first. The report from Franks made it up the chain within an hour. "Good," I said quietly. "Don't celebrate yet. They'll circle the wagons before they admit fault. You still need to protect yourself." "I already am." Holly paused. "You're planning something." I smiled faintly. "No. I'm just letting the system do what it does best, eat itself alive." By noon, the base rumor mill was running at full speed. The kind of buzz that travels faster than any official statement. I stopped by a gas station just outside post and overheard 2 civilians talking near the coffee machine. "You hear about that colonel who screwed up the whole network?" one said. "Yeah, my cousin's in logistics. Said half the systems went dark for 14 hours. Sounds like a nightmare." I took my coffee and left without a word. Funny how fast a career can unravel once the whispers start catching up with the truth. Back home, I opened my email and found a message from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You should have stayed quiet." The body was empty, but there was an attachment, a photo of my car parked outside the diner from that morning. The timestamp was 30 minutes ago. I didn't panic. I just locked the doors and forwarded it to Holly with one line. "Guess someone's nervous." Her reply came 2 minutes later. "Good. It means they know you're not backing down." And one. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Vanessa's face when Frank said her name in front of that room. The pride, the authority, it cracked like glass under pressure. I'd been on the receiving end of her control my whole life ever since we were kids playing army in the backyard. She was always the general, I was always the private. When I finally outranked her during my first posting, she congratulated me through gritted teeth. Now, all that control she clung to was slipping through her fingers. Around 0200, Briggs texted, "They've grounded her. Temporary removal pending review." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Copy." I didn't tell him what I was thinking, that for the first time in years, the power dynamic had finally shifted. I got up, poured a glass of water, and looked out the window. The night outside was quiet, just the distant hum of highway traffic. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was probably drafting another report, trying to salvage what was left of her command. But no report could fix what was broken. Not the systems, not the soldiers, not her reputation. And definitely not the one thing she'd never been able to control: me. The first thing I noticed when I woke up that morning was the quiet. No 5 a.m. phone calls, no inbox full of alerts, no calendar reminders screaming for attention. Just the steady hum of my refrigerator and the faint chirp of birds outside. For most people, that would sound peaceful. For me, it felt wrong, like the calm that comes right before an artillery round hits. I checked my phone. No calls from the base, no texts from Briggs. Just one unread message from Holly. Meeting confirmed. 0900, downtown Fayetteville. Bring everything. I grabbed my laptop, the flash drive, and a folder of printed logs. It was the kind of evidence that could make or break a career. Or in my sister's case, end one. The office building Holly worked out of didn't look like the kind of place that could rattle the Pentagon. It was a small suite above a dentist's office, with a coffee maker that sounded like it had seen combat. She greeted me in jeans and a blazer, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. Not the image of a lawyer who cared about formality, exactly the kind I needed. "Morning, Captain," she said, motioning to the chair across from her desk. "Just Amber now," I said. She smirked. "Not for long if we do this right." We spent the next hour sorting through every file, timestamp, and signature. Holly marked each page with sticky notes in 3 colors: red for violations, yellow for command abuse, blue for procedural errors. The stack of red grew faster than the others. "This isn't just a case of retaliation," she said finally. "This is a full-blown ethics breach. Command decisions made under personal bias, misuse of authority, fabrication of misconduct. She's cooked." I raised an eyebrow. "You sound like you've seen this before." She leaned back. "I was a JAG attorney for 8 years. I've seen officers bury careers to protect their egos. But family? That's new." "Yeah," I said. "She's an innovator." She grinned, but it didn't last. "If we go through with this, it gets ugly. They'll investigate everyone. You'll be under scrutiny too. I've been under scrutiny my entire life. Might as well make it official." Holly nodded. "All right then. We'll file an Inspector General complaint by the end of the day. Once it's in, they can't ignore it." She handed me the final form to sign. My hand hovered over the paper for a second before I wrote my name. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. Once I signed, there was no going back. When I left her office, the morning sun was bright enough to make me squint. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the heat on my face. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like opening a door I'd never be able to close again. Back at my apartment, I opened the blinds and stared out at the street below. A delivery truck idled outside. Kids rode bikes past the corner. Life moved on like nothing monumental had happened. Inside, my world was about to go to war. The IG complaint went through that afternoon. Holly sent confirmation. Filed and acknowledged. Case number 21 to 4778. A few hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Captain Holt," I said automatically before remembering I wasn't supposed to use that title anymore. A man's voice answered, deep and even. "Captain Holt, this is Major Stephen Grant with the Inspector General's office. I've reviewed your complaint. I'll be the assigned investigator." His tone was polite but professional, like someone who'd already learned not to get emotionally involved. "I'll need to schedule an interview," he continued. "You'll be required to provide any supporting material. We've already requested command access logs from Fort Liberty." "Good luck with that," I said. "They'll stall. Then they'll violate a direct IG request," he replied. "That usually motivates people." I couldn't help but smile. Maybe this guy was the real deal. We set a time for the next morning. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at my computer screen. The documents were all still there, digital proof of every order, every lie, every calculated step my sister had taken. But seeing them didn't give me satisfaction anymore. It just made me tired. That evening, I drove out past the base perimeter, where the pine trees thinned into open fields. The sky was pink and gold, the kind of sunset soldiers never notice because they're too busy following orders. I pulled over and killed the engine. For a few minutes, I just sat there, listening to cicadas hum through the heat. I joined the army because I believed in systems, rules, order, structure. Now I was watching one eat itself alive from the inside. By the time I got home, my inbox had a new email. The sender, Division Command. The subject line, Notice of Suspension and Retention of Clearance. I opened it and read the whole thing twice. I wasn't being discharged yet, just officially suspended, pending review of administrative complaint, which meant Vanessa had finally realized this wasn't going away quietly. I called Holly. She's moving fast, I said. She should, Holly replied. Her entire career's about to be dissected by a colonel who doesn't answer to her. I doubt she'll take that well. She won't, Holly said. That's when she'll make mistakes. Later that night, I walked down to the mailbox and found a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper. One line, handwritten, "The system won't save you." I stared at it for a while before tossing it in the trash. Whoever sent it didn't understand I wasn't trying to be saved. I was trying to be heard. The next morning, I arrived at the IG's temporary office downtown. Major Grant greeted me with a firm handshake and a notepad. No small talk, no fake sympathy. I respected that. He started recording the session. For the record, do you confirm that the complaint you submitted reflects your personal experience? Yes, I said. And that you believe your relief from command was improper? I know it was, I replied. The interview lasted almost 2 hours. He asked everything: dates, access logs, chain of command details. When I mentioned the forged transition review memo, his pen stopped mid-sentence. You have that? I do. He leaned forward. That document could change everything. If it's authentic, it proves intent. It's authentic, I said, and I have her signature. He nodded slowly, closing his notebook. Captain Holt, I can't promise how this ends, but I can promise it won't be buried. That was enough. When I left the building, the air smelled like rain was coming. I glanced up at the clouds forming over the city, dark and heavy. Somewhere, miles away, Vanessa was probably sitting in her office, drafting her version of events, trying to spin this into a misunderstanding. The difference was, this time, someone else was listening. I started the engine and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, waiting for the rain to start. When the first drop hit the windshield, I didn't move. I just watched it trail down the glass until it vanished into the blur of the next one, then another and another, steady and relentless. Like the system she'd trusted for years was finally turning on her. The power flickered once in my apartment that morning, which would have meant nothing if my phone hadn't buzzed a second later. Briggs's name flashed on the screen, and before I could answer, a second notification popped up: secure group chat from a half-dozen of my old team members. 3 words. The system's down. I called Briggs immediately. Define down. He didn't waste time. Full lockout. No access to shared servers, no login authentication, nothing. We've been dark since 0200. Command's losing their minds. I didn't ask who was in charge. I already knew. Let me guess, I said. Vanessa tried another update. Exactly, he replied. She ordered Wells to bypass your redundancy protocol. He used her override string. Now the entire network's frozen. I closed my eyes. That string was supposed to be used only for emergencies, life or death scenarios, not administrative tantrums. What about the backups? Corrupted. They tried to reinitialize the node manually, and it triggered a chain lock. We're looking at a 14-hour reset window. 14 hours of downtime in a cyber defense command center was the equivalent of leaving the front gate open during an attack. Briggs lowered his voice. Ma'am, they're scrambling to blame a technical failure, but everyone knows who caused it. Let them lie, I said. The logs won't. I hung up and stared at the blank computer screen in front of me. Part of me wanted to laugh. I'd spent weeks building that system so it couldn't be compromised by ego. I hadn't counted on Ego wearing my sister's uniform. By noon, the story was already spreading. Someone leaked the situation to a defense reporter who tweeted, "Major cyber outage reported at Fort Liberty. Command source cites procedural error." Procedural error was military code for somebody screwed up and we're not saying who. My phone rang again. "Holly, you seeing the news?" "Yeah." "Perfect timing," she said. "IG's going to have a field day with this. You couldn't script it better if you tried." "I didn't," I said. "That's the sad part." She paused. "You sound almost sorry." "I'm not, but I know the fallout's gonna hit everyone, good people included. I just wish it didn't have to burn down the whole place to expose one person." "That's how corruption works," Holly replied. "It collapses from the center outward. The closer you are to the core, the harder it hits." A thunderstorm rolled in that afternoon, as if the sky wanted to join in on the chaos. Rain pounded against the window while I watched live updates on the internal bulletin board. System diagnostic reports, cascading failure logs, urgent maintenance orders. It read like the final pages of a disaster novel. By 1400, Fort Liberty's command network had officially declared critical failure. Every secure database across 3 departments was locked out. Mission reports, personnel files, everything. Even Vanessa's own email was inaccessible. That part made me smile. At 1515, my phone buzzed again. Briggs, out of breath. "Ma'am, Division Command's here." They pulled the emergency switch and took control from her. "They relieved her?" "Temporarily," he said. "They've assigned Major Franks as acting commander. Vanessa's office is locked. She's in a closed-door meeting with division reps and IT from DC. It's bad." "How bad?" "They're pulling her access credentials as we speak." I let the silence hang for a moment. "Briggs, you did everything by the book, right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Keep it that way. Stay out of whatever happens next." He hesitated. "You think they'll court-martial her?" "Not yet," I said. "They'll drown her in paperwork first. That's how the Army kills people. It buries them in forms." By evening, my inbox filled with messages from soldiers who'd quietly left the unit since the briefing. Most of them were short, just lines like, "We saw what happened. You did the right thing." Or, "Wish you were still leading us." I read every one of them, not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that truth still had witnesses. At 1900, Holly called again. "The IG office just received Division's preliminary report on the outage. You're going to want to hear this." I put her on speaker. She read directly from the file. "Root cause identified as improper system override by command authority without adherence to standard operating procedure. 653. End quote. "That's her," I said. "It gets better," Holly continued. "Secondary contributing factor, direct authorization of subordinate without cross, verification of credentials. That's Wells. They're both named in the internal log." For a moment, I didn't say anything. The sound of rain on the windows filled the silence. "You realize what this means," Holly said softly. "Yeah," I said. "It means she finally tripped her own wire." That night, I opened the file myself. The timestamp on the override command matched exactly with the one from my backup logs, the same one she'd accused me of manipulating. I could almost picture her sitting in her office, finger hovering over the keyboard, convinced she could control everything. But the system didn't bend to arrogance. It obeyed logic, and logic always wins eventually. At 2230, I got another message from Briggs. "They're locking down her quarters. Command vehicle confiscated. Wells escorted off base. Amicline." I stared at the text until it blurred. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry, just empty. You spend years building a system, a unit, a career, and then watch someone dismantle it piece by piece for their own pride. Seeing it finally collapse didn't feel like justice. It felt like witnessing an old building fall in on itself, inevitable, tragic, and strangely quiet. I shut my laptop and stood by the window. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like electricity. The kind of smell that lingered after something powerful had short-circuited. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably pacing her quarters, rehearsing excuses, drafting statements, calling in favors. She'd always believed she could outthink everyone. But this time, her opponent wasn't me. It was the truth, and it didn't negotiate. At midnight, I heard my phone buzz one last time. An email, no subject line, from an address that looked vaguely familiar. When I opened it, there was just one sentence. The Colonel requests to speak with you. New signature, new timestamp, new pretensi. I stared at the screen for a long minute before typing my reply. Tell her the network's finally working again. She can send her apology that way. I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside, the sky had cleared completely. The base lights glowed faintly on the horizon, flickering through the trees. The sound of distant thunder rolled once, low and fading. For the first time in months, I felt like the system wasn't against me anymore. It was finally doing its job. By the time the IG summoned me back downtown, Fort Liberty was still trying to dig itself out of the crater Vanessa had made. Division Command had ordered a total audit of her leadership. And suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about transparency like it was a new invention. My inbox filled with requests from officers who used to avoid eye contact. Now they wanted to clarify the record. Funny how people remember integrity once the storm starts hitting their windows. The conference room at the Inspector General's office was cold enough to refrigerate meat. Major Grant was already there, sleeves rolled up, folders stacked in neat rows. He looked up when I entered. "Captain Holt," he said, still using the rank even though it wasn't technically mine anymore. "We're formalizing your submission." He gestured to the table. 3 thick binders sat waiting, each labeled Case 21 to 4778, Command Ethics Violation. "You sure know how to make a statement," I said, sitting down. He smiled faintly. "The data you provided was thorough. You could teach our analysts a few things. That's what got me fired, remember?" He flipped open the first binder. "We verified your evidence. The logs, the emails, the authorization trails, they all check out. Colonel Kincaid's override directly caused the system failure. But there's more." He pushed a document toward me. It was a memo from a senior officer at Division Command, dated 3 weeks before my suspension. The subject line read, "Proposed Leadership Adjustment, CPT Holt." Vanessa's name appeared in the prepared by field. Her justification was a masterpiece of polished deceit. Personnel fatigue, chain of communication breakdown, behavioral inconsistencies. She'd written an entire psychological profile about me without ever speaking to me outside work. She started planting the story early, Grant said. Created a paper trail before she made her move. I flipped to the next page, an endorsement from her direct superior. Short, almost careless. "Support is necessary. Trust Kincaid's judgment." There it was. The machine at work. People didn't need proof. They just needed familiarity. Grant closed the folder. "The Inspector General has initiated an official investigation into abuse of authority and falsification of records. You'll be contacted by a JAG officer for your witness statement." I nodded, but my stomach tightened. What happens to her in the meantime? She's relieved pending inquiry. Restricted access. No contact with personnel. She can't even step foot in the server room. For the first time in months, the air in that building felt breathable. As I left, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa's nameplate sitting on one of the administrative desks. Someone had already turned it upside down. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and blinding. The noise of the street felt like static after weeks of tension. I didn't celebrate. I just stood there a moment, breathing. That night, Briggs dropped by with takeout, and an expression that said he'd been sitting on something. He waited until we were both halfway through greasy burgers before speaking. "You know, ma'am, everyone's talking about the complaint. Some people think you went too far." I wiped my hands with a napkin. "And what do you think?" He didn't hesitate. "I think someone had to." He slid a small USB drive across the table. "Internal recordings from the control room the day of the outage. Vanessa's voice is all over them. She gave direct orders to bypass every safeguard you built." Though, I raised an eyebrow. "That's classified data, Briggs." He shrugged. "So was what she stole from you." We sat there in silence while the sound of the diner TV filled the gaps. Some local anchor was rambling about storms moving in from the coast. Briggs looked up at the screen and smirked. "Seems like everywhere's getting cleaned out this week." Later, after he left, I plugged in the drive. The first file opened with static, then the clipped tone of a command room. Vanessa's voice came through, calm but impatient. "Run the override, Lieutenant. I don't care what Holt's protocols say, this is my command now." Then Wells's nervous reply, "Ma'am, that could corrupt the system." "Then fix it. That's an order." Click. Silence. I sat back, feeling the weight of every word. It wasn't anger I felt. It was relief, the kind that comes when you finally stop doubting your own memory. The next morning, I delivered the drive to Major Grant's office. He listened to 30 seconds of the recording before hitting pause. "This is clear command misconduct," he said flatly. "We'll add it to the file." When I turned to leave, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Captain, most people wouldn't have documented all this. They'd have let it go." "Yeah," I said. "That's how people like her stay in charge." For the next week, the investigation moved fast. Word spread that IG auditors were interviewing staff, combing through digital trails, reviewing communications. The atmosphere on base turned strange, half fear, half relief. Holly called every evening to update me. "The command climate report's out," she said one night. "They found multiple morale violations, toxic environment, intimidation, retribution. It's damning." I leaned back in my chair. "So they can't bury it?" "Not this time. Too many witnesses. Too much documentation." Like. A pause followed. Then her voice softened. "You did everything right, Amber. You stayed within the system. That matters." I wanted to believe her. But part of me still wondered if any of this would make a difference. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number again. When I answered, there was nothing but breathing on the other end. Then a familiar voice, low and sharp. "You think this makes you righteous?" I didn't have to ask who it was. "I think it makes me honest," I said. "You embarrassed this entire command. You embarrassed me." "No," I said evenly. "You did that yourself." A long silence followed. Then she said almost bitterly, "You were always better at playing the victim." I could hear papers shuffling, maybe her pacing. "The Army doesn't reward people who make noise, Amber. It buries them." "I know," I said, but I stopped digging. The line went dead. When I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. Whatever she had left to threaten me with, it didn't work anymore. That evening, my inbox pinged with an encrypted attachment from Major Grant. The file name read, IG Interim Findings, Confidential. I opened it carefully, scanning the summary page. There it was in black and white. Colonel Vanessa Kincaid found in violation of UCMJ Article 133, Conduct Unbecoming an Officer, pending disciplinary action. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen. 12 years of service, 6 commendations, a spotless record, and she'd thrown it all away to prove she was right. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was something colder and cleaner, like the sound of wind after a storm. I closed the laptop and stood by the window again. The base lights flickered in the distance, steady and silent. Somewhere out there, investigators were sealing evidence, writing reports, finalizing statements. The system was moving, slow but deliberate, like a machine built to grind truth out of noise. And for once, I wasn't part of the noise anymore. It started quietly. No announcement, no confrontation. Just the sound of doors closing, badges turning in, and names disappearing from the roster. One by one, my former soldiers were leaving Fort Liberty. Some transferred, some resigned. A few just stopped showing up. And nobody asked why, because everyone already knew. Briggs called me first. "Ma'am, they're walking out. Half the shop's filing reassignment requests this week." "How many?" I asked. 22 so far. It's spreading fast. Even the civilian contractors are bailing. One of them said he'd rather flip burgers than work under her again. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She must be panicking. More like pretending she's not. She's calling it a personnel realignment. I let out a short laugh. That's one way to phrase a mutiny. He hesitated. "Command's blaming you, you know. Saying your complaint caused division within the ranks." "Of course they are," I said. "That's easier than admitting leadership failed." But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling twisting in my chest. I hadn't told anyone to walk out. I hadn't planned a rebellion. But there it was, a slow, deliberate rejection of her authority. By midweek, the ripple turned into a wave. The base bulletin listed more departures than arrivals. The morale survey anonymously leaked, naturally painted an ugly picture. Lack of trust in leadership. Fear of retaliation. Toxic command environment. It was the kind of report that reached the Pentagon before breakfast. Holly called that afternoon. The IG just got hold of the morale survey. Division's already asking questions about command climate. Good, I said. Let them read it. She paused. You sound tired. I am. I didn't want it to get this far. Aracles. Amber, you didn't make it toxic, she said firmly. You just turned on the lights. That night, I stopped by a small bar just outside the base neutral ground, where soldiers went to blow off steam without uniforms or ranks. Briggs and Rivera were already there, sitting in a corner booth. When I walked in, half the place went quiet. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. They'd all seen what happened. Some nodded. A few looked away, unsure if acknowledging me would get them in trouble. Briggs slid a beer across the table. Word is, Division HQ wants to do a full command climate inspection. I raised an eyebrow. That's the military's version of fumigating a house. Rivera smirked. Guess they finally smelled the rot. We talked for hours about the mess, about the soldiers who'd left, about the future. Rivera mentioned she'd been offered a civilian cybersecurity job in DC. They said they want people with moral backbone, she added. Guess word got around. I grinned. You'll make them nervous. That's the plan, she said. When I drove home later, the parking lot outside my building was empty, except for one car. A dark SUV, engine running. I slowed, eyes on the tinted windows. The driver didn't move. I parked anyway, unlocked my door, and waited. After a few minutes, the SUV pulled away, headlights fading into the dark. Maybe paranoia, maybe not. Either way, I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I woke to an inbox full of messages, some from strangers, others from old colleagues. Words like respect, courage, thank you. It felt strange, almost undeserved. I hadn't set out to be anyone's example. I just refused to stay silent. Then came one message that stopped me cold. From command.division@army.mil. Subject: Notification of interim findings. IG case 21 to 4778. Body: Preliminary review indicates substantiated claims of misconduct and retaliation. Full findings to follow. Please maintain confidentiality until official release. It was happening faster than anyone expected. Later that day, Holly called again. You're officially cleared. No misconduct found on your part. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And her? She's on administrative leave pending disciplinary action. Division HQ requested she surrender her credentials. I stared out the window, watching traffic drift past. They're finally pulling her badge. She earned it, Holly said. That evening, Briggs stopped by unannounced with 2 other soldiers in civilian clothes. They carried a folded flag, the one that used to hang in my command office. The unit voted, he said. They wanted you to have it. I hesitated, looking at the flag. The stitching was worn from years of dust and fluorescent light. You know this could get you in trouble. Briggs shook his head. After what she pulled, nobody's listening to her orders anymore. I unfolded it slightly, the stars catching the glow from the kitchen light. It wasn't just a flag. It was proof that what I'd built hadn't died with my career. We stood there for a while, talking about nothing deployment stories, dumb mistakes, things we missed about the Army before politics got in the way. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal again. Before they left, Briggs turned to me. You think she'll ever admit it? I thought about that for a second. No, but the Army already has. After they left, I hung the flag on the wall above my desk. The same wall that once held my commissioning certificate. Different kind of honor, but maybe the one that mattered more. Over the next week, the news broke. Not officially, no one ever admits fault, officially, but through leaks, whispers, and back-channel memos. Colonel, under IG review for leadership misconduct. Mass exodus at Fort Liberty linked to command issues. They didn't name her, but everyone knew. A few media outlets reached out to me for comment. I ignored them. The story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. The following Monday, Division HQ issued a new directive. All units were to conduct mandatory ethics briefings and anonymous reporting workshops. The memo didn't mention me, but Holly texted me a screenshot anyway. Looks like you rewrote policy, she wrote. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "No." The system finally did what it was supposed to. By the end of that month, the numbers were official. 22 soldiers and 12 contractors had either resigned, transferred, or requested reassignment. It was the largest voluntary exodus Fort Liberty had seen in a decade. And yet, somehow, the command was quieter now, less noise, fewer shouting matches, fewer fear-fueled meetings. I heard from Rivera that morale was already improving under Major Franks. "He actually listens," she said. "It's weird." I smiled at that. The Army didn't need perfect leaders, it just needed human ones. Late one evening, I got an email from Division Command addressed to former personnel. It was a simple acknowledgement. "Your cooperation during the investigation is appreciated. Actions have been taken to address identified issues. Your integrity reflects the core values of the service." No apology, no names, but it didn't need either. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. On the wall, the flag hung still and steady, a reminder that integrity doesn't need applause. It just needs to outlast the noise. The phone buzzed once more, another unknown number. I almost ignored it but answered anyway. "Captain Holt?" a man's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Colonel Matthews, Division HQ. I just wanted to say off the record what you did took guts. Most people wouldn't have gone against their own blood." "It wasn't about that," I said. "It was about the uniform." He was silent for a moment. "Well," he said finally, "you reminded a lot of people what that's supposed to mean." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, listening to the distant hum of night traffic. Somewhere out there, soldiers were still packing boxes, printing orders, walking out the same gate I had weeks ago. Not in protest. In principle. And maybe that was the real victory, watching people choose honor on their own. The letter from the Department of the Army came in a plain envelope. No ceremony, no warning. Just the words, "Your resignation has been accepted. Effective immediately." It felt strange holding it, like the final page of a story that had already ended weeks ago. I wasn't angry, just numb. 16 years of service reduced to a paragraph signed by someone who'd never met me. I stared at it for a minute, then folded it carefully and slid it into a folder with my commendations, medals, and one old photo of my first platoon. The Army had taken a lot from me: sleep, patience, trust, but it had also given me something permanent, the ability to rebuild from zero, and that apparently was about to come in handy. By then, I'd been meeting quietly with a few of my former team members in a rented warehouse near the industrial park, just outside Fayetteville. It smelled like dust and burnt coffee, and the air conditioning rattled like an old tank. But to us, it was freedom. Briggs was the first to show up that morning, balancing 2 boxes of cables and a bag of donuts. "If we're going to start over, we're doing it with sugar and caffeine," he said, dropping everything onto a folding table. Rivera followed, carrying a laptop and a half-charged projector. "We've got 1 month left on the lease before they double the rent," she said. "We better decide what the hell we're building." "What we're building," I said, "is something that can't be corrupted by chain of command or politics. Something functional, ethical, transparent." Briggs grinned. "You make that sound like a religion." "Maybe it needs to be," I said, "because the Army just proved rules don't matter unless people care about them. We didn't have uniforms anymore, but we still ran like a unit. Everyone arrived early, stayed late, and worked like it was deployment season again. Within a week, we had tables lined with monitors, a server stack humming in the corner, and a whiteboard full of sketches and mission plans. Priya, one of our old data analysts, had been freelancing for a defense contractor. She showed up one day with 2 boxes of refurbished routers and a grin that could cut steel. "I told my boss I was taking personal leave," she said. "He didn't ask why. I think he's scared." By the end of that week, we had a name: Sentinel Forge Labs. It was Rivera's idea. Sentinel, she said, because we guard integrity. Forge, because we build it ourselves. It stuck. I registered the company on a Tuesday afternoon, the same day I turned in my base access card for the last time. The guard at the gate gave me a sympathetic look when I handed it over. "You served well, Captain," he said. "Most of us know the truth." I nodded, thanked him, and drove away without looking back. At the warehouse, Briggs was testing the network speed when I walked in. We're officially live, he said, holding up a thumb drive. This is the first stable server. What's it called? I asked. He grinned. Phoenix 1. I laughed. A little dramatic, don't you think? Not if it fits, he said. We spent the next few days laying out contracts, systems, and possible clients. Rivera handled logistics. Priya ran security protocols. Briggs took charge of operations. I worked on proposals and outreach, cold calling companies that had once partnered with our Army division. The first few calls were disasters. Nobody wanted to take a chance on a startup run by a bunch of ex-military techs with no capital. But word travels fast in defense circles. And apparently, the story of what happened at Fort Liberty had become unofficial legend. One contact, an executive from Henderson Dynamics, picked up on the third ring. You're the officer who walked out with 22 soldiers, he said. My kind of leadership. What are you building? Secure infrastructure with accountability, I said. Real oversight. No hidden backdoors, no unchecked authority. He chuckled. You're selling integrity. That's rare in this business. Integrity scales, I replied. 2 days later, he sent a signed contract worth $1.2 million. The news spread fast. Then came 2 more clients, Patterson Systems and AeroVantage Tech, both citing confidence in ethical leadership as their reason for joining. We weren't even an official company yet, and we already had more work than we could handle. Briggs slapped a contract on the table one morning. You realize we've tripled projected revenue in a week? Don't jinx it, I said, but I couldn't stop smiling. That same day, I got a voicemail from a familiar voice, Colonel Matthews. Heard you're building something from the ashes, he said. If you ever decide to scale up, the department might want to partner. I replayed that line twice. The department. The same system that let me fall was now watching what I built next. That night, we celebrated with pizza and instant coffee because that's what startups on military paychecks can afford. Rivera set up a small speaker and played old marching songs remixed with pop beats. Someone hung an American flag on the far wall, right above a handwritten sign that read, Integrity is the mission. And, for the first time in a long time, I looked around and saw people smiling. Not the strained smiles of survival, but the kind that comes when you actually believe in what you're doing. At some point, Priya nudged me. You ever think about calling your sister? I shook my head. No, there's nothing left to say. She might see what you're doing, she said. She'll know what she lost. I didn't answer, because she was right, and I didn't want to admit it. A week later, the Army officially released its findings. The report was long, full of bureaucratic language and sterile conclusions. But one line stood out. Failure of leadership resulted in systemic breakdown and personnel exodus. Remedial action recommended. Translation: Vanessa's career was over. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone destroy themselves. It just felt inevitable. The following morning, Holly showed up at the warehouse with 2 coffees and a grin. You're famous, she said. What now? Local paper did a feature. Ex-Army captain builds ethical tech firm after scandal. They even called you the Fort Liberty whistleblower. I groaned. God, that sounds like a bad TV pilot. Hey, you wanted truth, she said. This is what it looks like when people start listening. She looked around the warehouse wires, laptops, pizza boxes, and all. You realize this place feels more like command than any base I've ever visited? That's the goal, I said. Structure without the stupidity. That night, as everyone packed up, I stayed behind to finish the last email of the day. My resignation letter sat next to me on the desk, the one I'd gotten from the Army. I looked at the signature, then at the glowing monitor filled with our new company's logo. It struck me that maybe I hadn't been fired from something, I'd been freed from it. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, washing the warehouse in pale yellow. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and listened to the hum of our servers. That sound used to mean work. Now it meant possibility. For the first time since losing everything, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The news didn't break in a headline or a press release. It came in whispers, first emails forwarded between officers, quiet mentions in hallways, then finally an official memo from Division Command. Colonel Vanessa Kincaid, relieved of duty effective immediately, pending permanent removal from active service. No adjectives, no emotion, just military precision stripping a life down to procedure. Holly called me before I could even process it. They're calling it retirement under review, she said, her voice half amused, half disgusted. Translation. She's out, but they're pretending she left gracefully. She never does anything gracefully, I said. Apparently, the final blow had come during a closed-door meeting at Fort Liberty, an audit review that exposed her manipulation of budgetary allocations, falsified readiness reports, and the override logs I'd provided. She'd tried to shift blame to Wells, but Division had already pulled his testimony. He'd told investigators exactly what happened. She'd ordered the bypass herself. By noon, her access credentials were revoked. By 1500, her nameplate was gone from the command office door. Rivera sent me a picture. The wall where her portrait used to hang was empty, a clean rectangle of lighter paint surrounded by years of grime. They didn't even replace it, Rivera texted. Just took it down and left the space. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything to say. That afternoon, I was in the warehouse, trying to focus on a client call, when a black sedan pulled up outside. The driver stepped out in uniform Army Legal Service Branch, JAG officer. He walked straight in like he'd done this 1,000 times. Captain Holt? Former captain, I corrected automatically. He handed me an envelope. Notification of closure. You're formally cleared of all allegations. And for the record, he added, lowering his voice, the colonel's facing an Article 15 and a general officer memorandum of reprimand. That's career ending. I took the envelope and nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. Between us, ma'am, I read your file. What you did took guts. Most people in your position either fold or play along. I tried that once, I said. Didn't end well. He smiled slightly and left. The sedan disappeared down the street, leaving nothing but exhaust and silence. Briggs wandered in a few minutes later with coffee. You okay? Yeah, I said, holding up the envelope. It's over. He studied my face for a second. You don't look happy. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel, I admitted. Relief, maybe. Or just done. He nodded. Closure doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels quiet. We went back to work. Calls, emails, server updates, normal things. But normal didn't feel normal anymore. By that evening, word had spread far beyond the base. Military forums, LinkedIn groups, even Reddit threads were buzzing with versions of the story. A colonel taken down for retaliation. The 22 who walked out? Fort Liberty's reckoning. None of them got the details right, but they all agreed on one thing. Leadership had failed, and someone finally fought back. That same night, my phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Amber, she said. For a second, I didn't breathe. Vanessa. They told me you'd pick up, she said, her voice rough, like she hadn't slept in days. I almost didn't. I suppose congratulations are in order, she said, bitterness creeping into the pause between words. You won. This wasn't a competition, I said. You sabotaged your own career. I protected it, she snapped, until you decided to destroy me in front of the entire command. I kept my voice even. You destroyed yourself the moment you made your ego more important than the mission. There was silence on the line. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller. Do you know what it's like to have everything you built ripped away in public? Yes, I said quietly. I do. That. She exhaled, and for a brief second, I almost heard something human in her tone. Then it was gone. Enjoy your victory, Captain. I didn't win anything, I said. But she'd already hung up. I stood there staring at the phone, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just an odd kind of emptiness that comes when the battle you've been fighting finally ends and there's no one left to fight. A few days later, Division HQ released the formal statement. It was cold, bureaucratic, exactly how the Army likes to wash its hands of scandal. Following a comprehensive review, corrective action has been taken. Command at Fort Liberty remains committed to professionalism and integrity. Professionalism and integrity, the same values they'd ignored when it mattered. But there was one thing they couldn't bury. The walkout, the exodus, the 22 soldiers who stood up when I did. It had become part of Fort Liberty folklore. They called it the Tuesday briefing. Even new recruits whispered about it, how a commanding officer lost her unit in 5 minutes flat. Meanwhile, Sentinel Forge Labs was growing faster than any of us expected. Henderson Dynamics expanded our contract. Patterson Systems renewed early. 2 new clients joined from the private sector, citing ethical leadership as the reason. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built a second career out of the thing that got me fired. One afternoon, while we were reviewing quarterly reports, Rivera looked up from her laptop. "You know," she said, "you could probably write a book about all this." I smirked. "And title it what? How to Get Fired by Family and Still End Up in Forbes?" Briggs chuckled. "You're not wrong." The laughter died down, and for a moment, we just sat there listening to the quiet hum of the servers. It hit me then. This was the command I'd always wanted. No ranks, no politics. Just people who trusted each other. Later that week, Holly called again. "You'll like this one," she said. "Division commands implementing a new policy on leadership conduct. Mandatory oversight for every command-level officer." "Let me guess," I said. "They're calling it an improvement initiative." "Exactly. But we both know who started it." I didn't respond right away. It wasn't pride I felt. It was something closer to peace. That night, I found myself back near Fort Liberty, parked just outside the perimeter fence. The base looked smaller than I remembered. The floodlights still hummed, the same towers still guarded the gates, but the air felt lighter somehow, maybe because I wasn't breathing its politics anymore. As I sat there, an older MP approached, flashlight bouncing off the side of my car. When he recognized me, he smiled. "Captain Holt, haven't seen you in a while." "Former captain," I said. He nodded. "Doesn't matter. Around here, you'll always be the one who stood up." I didn't have an answer for that. I just smiled, started the car, and drove off. The next morning, Briggs found a news article online. Former colonel retires amid investigation into Fort Liberty scandal. It included a photo of Vanessa leaving the base, wearing civilian clothes, carrying a single duffel bag. She looked like someone who'd just realized her war was over. Briggs glanced up from the screen. "You want to see it?" I shook my head. "No need." He closed the laptop, and that was the last time her name came up in our office. The Army moved on. We moved forward. And for the first time since the briefing that started it all, I didn't feel like I was looking back over my shoulder anymore. The morning of the summit felt nothing like victory. It felt like work, just another day, where the coffee tasted like burnt fuel, and the lights in the auditorium buzzed too loudly. The event wasn't mine exactly. The Chamber of Commerce had invited Sentinel Forge Labs to speak at their annual Leadership and Ethics in Innovation Forum. They wanted a case study in resilience. What they didn't realize was that my story wasn't about resilience, it was about consequence. Briggs was already at the podium, testing the mic. Rivera adjusted the slides on the projector. Simple ones, just bullet points and a few images of our systems in action. No dramatics, no marketing fluff. We'd agreed early that our brand wasn't about selling trust. It was about showing it. When it was my turn to take the stage, the room went still in that polite, expectant way professional crowds do. Rows of business leaders, a few military officers in dress uniform, local press near the back. 100 faces waiting to hear a version of the story they'd already seen in headlines. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands on the podium, and started the way soldiers do with the truth, plain and unadorned. "I once worked in a system that rewarded silence more than integrity," I said. "It took me too long to understand that keeping your head down isn't loyalty, it's fear dressed up as discipline." A few people nodded. Others just listened. "I made a mistake," I continued. "I believed that integrity was built into the institution, that if I followed the rules, the system would protect what was right. It didn't. Because systems don't have ethics, people do." I let that hang for a moment, long enough for it to settle. And when people in power forget that, everything underneath them starts to rot. You can't fix corruption with another layer of protocol. You fix it by creating something better, something transparent, something human. I didn't use her name. I didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew the story of the colonel in the briefing and the 22 soldiers who walked out. They'd read about the investigation, the fallout, the startup that rose from the ruins. They came for a redemption arc, but I wasn't giving them one. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about rebuilding without bitterness. I didn't start a company to prove anyone wrong. I started it to prove that right still matters." End of re. When I finished, the applause was quiet at first, then grew steady. Not thunderous, not performative, just real. The kind that means people heard you. After the talk, a few officers approached, introducing themselves one by one. One major said, "You reminded me why I joined in the first place." Another shook my hand and muttered, "Wish you'd been my CO." I smiled, thanked them, but didn't linger. Compliments were nice, but they didn't change what happened. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the sky cloudless. Rivera caught up with me on the steps. "You realize you just rewrote half the leadership manuals for the next decade, right?" I laughed. "If they start quoting me, we've hit rock bottom." Briggs joined us, holding his phone. "You should see the news feeds," he said. "They're calling your speech the most grounded thing anyone said about ethics in years." "Great," I said dryly. "That means someone's already trying to make a podcast out of it." We all laughed, and for a moment, the tension that had shadowed us for months finally lifted. That evening, after the summit ended, I walked the long route back to the parking lot, past the reflecting pool near the Civic Center. The water was still, catching the fading light. My reflection looked older, somehow tired, but steadier. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it but didn't. "Amber," said the voice on the other end. For a heartbeat, I froze. Vanessa. She didn't sound like a colonel anymore. She sounded like someone who'd run out of armor. "I saw the broadcast," she said. "Your speech." "Wasn't meant for you," I said. "I know," she replied. "That's why it hit harder." Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence you can only share with someone who knows exactly how you broke each other. I wanted to say, "You were right," she said finally. "About the system, about me. I just couldn't see it then." Her voice cracked slightly, just once. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like the truth. "I didn't do this to humiliate you," I said quietly. "I did it to stop the bleeding." "I know," she said again. "And I'm sorry. For all of it." I didn't answer right away. There were 1,000 things I could have said, how her pride wrecked lives, how her silence turned soldiers against each other, but none of it mattered anymore. The damage was done. The apology, late as it was still a kind of peace offering. "I hope you find something worth rebuilding," I said finally. She exhaled, soft and unsteady. "I'm trying." Then, without another word, she hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at the screen. The call log blinked once and went still. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked back at the reflection in the water. The ripples from a passing breeze broke it apart, scattering my image into fragments of color and motion. Maybe that was fitting. Maybe rebuilding wasn't about putting things back together, it was about learning to live with the pieces. A few days later, I visited Fort Liberty one last time. I had to sign final documents for an unrelated audit involving one of our early contracts. Driving past the main gate, I half expected the usual security checks, the barking orders, the noise, but it was quiet. Cleaner somehow. Inside the administration building, there was a new plaque on the wall. "Integrity defines leadership." Below it, a small brass engraving listed the names of soldiers who had upheld core values during adverse circumstances. Mine was their small, understated, easy to miss unless you looked close. I didn't linger. I just nodded to it and walked out. On my way back to the car, I passed a group of recruits running drills. Young, eager, shouting cadence in unison. For a second, I remembered what it felt like to be that sure of something bigger than yourself. Then one of them called out, "Ma'am," and saluted as I walked by. I stopped. "You don't have to do that," I said. He grinned. "We know. We just wanted to." I smiled back, returned the salute, and kept walking. Back at Sentinel Forge Labs, life continued. Contracts grew, clients multiplied, but the tone never changed. Every new hire got the same briefing. We don't cut corners, we don't hide mistakes, we don't lie. Rivera even had those words printed on a poster in the lobby. Some days I'd catch myself staring at that poster longer than necessary, realizing how simple it was and how impossible it seemed for so long. Months later, at a small after-hours gathering, Briggs raised a glass. "To the briefing that started everything," he said. We laughed, but quietly. There was no bitterness left, just a shared understanding of what it cost to tell the truth. When everyone left, I stayed behind to lock up. The office was quiet, the servers humming softly in the background. Outside, the street was empty, except for the glow of the city beyond. I stood at the window for a while, thinking about the word Vanessa had used, sorry. It didn't fix anything, but it closed a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. And somewhere in that silence, I realized something else. Forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it just means you stop waiting for the apology to hurt. I turned off the lights, grabbed my jacket, and stepped into the cool night air. The city was calm, the world unremarkable again, which, after everything, felt like the greatest peace imaginable.